مرحبا بكم في حوارات السياق. في أعقاب نجاح الوساطة الصينية في تقريب وجهات النظر بين الإيرانيين والسعوديين، يرى البعض أن العلاقات السعودية الصينية آخذة في التصاعد، ونتيجة لذلك كرست واشنطن جهودها لاستعادة العلاقات مع الرياض خوفا من خسارة حليف تاريخي قوي في منطقة تعج بالمشاكل. عموما للمزيد من المتابعة حول هذا الملف ينضم إلينا البروفيسور أورد كيتري، زميل أقدم في مؤسسة الدفاع عن الديمقراطيات. بروفيسور أورد، مرحبا بك معنا.
Pleasure to be here.
لماذا باعتقادك العلاقات الأمريكية السعودية باتت على مفترق طرق كما كتبتم في تقرير لمؤسسة الدفاع عن الديمقراطيات؟
Yes, I do think that U.S.-Saudi relations are at a crossroad. There's considerable tension in the relationship, particularly over issues, I would say, relating to human rights and also relating to oil pricing. The Biden administration has obviously been dissatisfied with how Saudi Arabia has responded to requests to increase production and otherwise moderate the price of oil.
هل الاقتراب من الصين فاقم الأمور؟
Well, I think there's a significant reason for concern that is what has occurred. That Saudi frustration with the United States has led the Saudis to look in other directions to see what might be available in terms of relations with China.
القطار الصيني انطلق في المنطقة، هل من السهل إيقافه؟ الصين تتحرك على أكثر من اتجاه دبلوماسي، عسكري، تكنولوجي وغيرها.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ultimately the Saudis are going to be faced with some kind of a choice between China and the United States. They can only go so far with China before support for Saudi Arabia in the United States goes down considerably. The United States sees itself as, in a kind of large-scale struggle with China, and countries are expected to take one side or the other with the United States or with China. China, the Saudi Arabia needs to think carefully about what it can get from China, and could it really replace what Saudi Arabia gets from the United States? Saudi Arabia has arms, very sophisticated weapons that it has procured from the United States. Is China able to supply arms that are as sophisticated? And the problem is, if the bottom falls out of the U.S.-Saudi relationship, is Saudi Arabia going to be able to get from the United States the maintenance that it requires, the spare parts that it requires, the ammunition? So, like I said, there's only so far that Saudi Arabia can go before it really faces a fundamental choice between the United States and China. Our report looks at 7 areas in which there is tension between Saudi Arabia and the United States, and we suggest ways in which the relationship could be put on a firmer footing. That's what our report does. In each area, we talk about what steps we think could be agreeable to both the United States and Saudi Arabia that would put the relationship back on a firmer footing.
هل واشنطن ستكون راضية عن موازنة الرياض لعلاقاتها مع الصين والولايات المتحدة؟
My sense is that if Saudi Arabia wants to improve its relationship with the United States, that it really can't go much further in terms of cooperation with China. We know that there's some, obviously, the Saudis are selling oil to China. Okay. The Saudis are collaborating at a very low level with China on nuclear issues, looking for uranium in the Saudi desert. There are concerns about Saudi-Chinese collaboration on missiles. I think, the United States is not saying I don't think it's the view of the Biden administration or the Republicans that Saudi Arabia cannot have a relationship with China, but the closeness with China, particularly in the military cooperation sphere, really can't go much further if the Saudis want to put their relationship with the US back on a more solid footing.
بالعودة إلى تقريركم، دعنا نستطلع اقتراحاتكم لتحسين العلاقة بين الرياض وواشنطن.
So first, I'll just sort of list the points, and then I'll talk a little bit about them, right? I mean, one is on arms transfers. Another is security assurances of cooperation. Another is oil, nuclear energy, terrorism, human rights. And finally, dealing with the threat of Iran. So on arms transfers, for example, we suggest that if Saudi Arabia makes, reasonable concessions to the United States in other arenas, including on oil, that the United States should be prepared to make it easier for the Saudis to buy weapons from the United States. The U.S. can take certain steps to make it easier. And not only in exchange for Saudi concessions in other areas, but also there's a lot of concern that the Saudis were misusing American supplied weapons in Yemen. Thankfully, that conflict seems to be coming to a close, but the US Congress in particular wants to be sure that the Saudis are very rigorously ensuring that their weapons are not used to unduly kill civilians. With regard to security assurances and cooperation, we talk about a couple of steps that the U.S. could take as part of a package deal. One is to declare that Saudi is a major defense partner. Another is to elevate Saudi status to that of a major non-NATO ally. Along with some other countries in the world. On oil, we largely see this as an arena in which we feel the Saudis can be reassuring the United States with regard to pricing, reassuring the United States that Saudi will continue to insist on receiving payment for oil using dollars, and also that Saudi will continue to invest at its current magnitude in U.S. Treasury securities. Nuclear energy, there's some differences of opinion there. The Saudis want cooperation from the United States. They want the U.S. to cooperate with a Saudi nuclear program that would include enrichment of uranium. The U.S. is concerned about that. We suggest some compromises. On human rights, we suggest some ways in which Saudi Arabia could reassure the U.S. Congress by taking steps towards improving its human rights record. And terrorism, we also discuss some arenas for continued and additional cooperation.
تحدثت عن صفة شريك رئيسي في الدفاع أو تحديد المملكة حليفاً رئيسياً خارج الناتو. هل وصلت واشنطن باعتقادك إلى هذا المستوى من التفكير؟
So that's a very good question. And so my answer is they wouldn't be ready to do just that all by itself. But what we suggest, right, is 7 areas. And on some of these, the U.S. makes concessions to Saudi Arabia, and on some of them, Saudi Arabia makes concessions to the U.S. And it's my view that as part of a package along the lines that we describe, yes, Congress would be willing to go along with Saudi Arabia being named a major defense partner or a major non-NATO ally. I would also note that Congress, on major defense partner, Congress doesn't actually have to approve it. They just have to not block it. So the Biden administration just needs what we say acquiescence from Congress. The Biden administration can do it. Congress might not be happy about it, but they don't actually have to vote for it. So we very carefully choose arenas where the Biden administration has a lot of flexibility and could, in exchange for Saudi concessions, as we've described, oil, human rights, etc., the Biden administration could take most of these steps so long as Congress did not actively object. And by actively object, I mean they would really have to introduce a bill opposing it and get it passed by both houses of Congress, and then the president would veto it and they would have to override. So it wouldn't be easy for Congress to object to these steps. And I don't think they'd go to the trouble on major defense partner or major non-NATO ally if Saudi Arabia was making these other concessions.
فيما يتعلق بالملف الإيراني، هناك من سيخبرك أن السعودية لم تعد في حاجة واشنطن. يمكن للسعوديين أن يتحدثوا مع الإيرانيين مباشرة.
Well, they may be trying to fix their problem, the Iranians, directly. I don't know, I don't have insights into what the Saudi leadership thinks, but Iran has a long history of betraying promises, of violating international commitments. The question the Saudis need to ask themselves is, do they really trust Iran after all of these decades to suddenly become a good actor in the Middle East? Or does Saudi Arabia benefit from having, shall we say, big brother, the United States, and its military and its commitments standing there ready to intervene? And maybe that's the best way of ensuring that the Iranians behave themselves.
تحدثت أكثر من مرة في هذا اللقاء عن تقديم الطرفين واشنطن والرياض لتنازلات لترميم العلاقة بينهما. ما المطلوب من الرياض من وجهة النظر الأمريكية؟
I think the recommendations that we include in our report are all designed to be within the realm of possible. We've heard the Saudis say occasionally that they want to be treated just like a NATO country, that the US will promise that any attack on Saudi Arabia will be treated like an attack on the United States, and the United States will immediately go to war. That would require a treaty, and that would require Congress to affirmatively weigh in and approve it. And as I think we indicate in the report, that I think is not a possibility. The US does that for very few countries outside of NATO. That I think would be more than could be achieved in an agreement along the lines that we discuss. But again, we're not, just saying the Saudis need to do this and that and the other. We are sketching out, here are some things we recommend that the US could do in terms of concessions. Here are some concessions we recommend the Saudis could make. We've thought a lot about these concessions, talked to a lot of people. We think these are within the realm of possible, especially in exchange for each other, right? Concessions that, relatively speaking, are worth as much to the US as to the Saudis, and therefore there's a potential for a deal here, we think.
باعتقادك لو رغب السعوديون في ترميم العلاقة مع الأمريكيين، هل ينتظرون إدارة جديدة أو العهدة الثانية لبايدن حيث ستكون يداه مطلقتان أكثر، أم يجب عليهم اتخاذ القرار الآن؟ هل نافذة إصلاح العلاقة ضيقة؟
So I think my advice would be to anyone that I think there's a very strong possibility that Joe Biden is going to be reelected. I think that Joe Biden's team is likely to stay relatively the same in terms of the foreign policy arena. And I think that nobody benefits from continued tension between the US and Saudi Arabia. And frankly, we're in a situation where Iran is moving quickly to towards acquiring a nuclear weapon. And I think that a strong US-Saudi relationship will be very important. A partnership will be very important, both in preventing Iran from taking that last step and also in dealing with a very changed Middle East if Iran takes that step. So I think it's important to get US-Saudi relations on the right track as soon as possible.
بروفيسور أورد، شكرا جزيلا لك للمشاركة معنا في حوارات السياق.
Sure thing. Pleasure.
مشاهدينا، شكرا على طيب المتابعة. إلى الملتقى.